I've never had a serious illness as such, like pneumonia or cancer. Oh, sorry, I have had cancer, had prostate cancer, but fortunately it was all encapsulated and it was removed, but there was no local or distant spread. So that's gone pretty well, although it's a pretty nervous time. But I did have one life-threatening illness, if you like. It was when I injured myself with a circular saw. I talked about it elsewhere, but it's where I was stupidly had a piece of wood on the ground that I was cutting with a circular saw. Had the circular saw in my hand, put my foot at one end of the wood, and the circular saw hit a knot in the wood and bounced out, and the safety guard didn't activate, so I cut through half of my left leg and my right leg. I laugh now, but at that time I honestly thought, I looked down and there were these huge cuts and blood pumping out and that sort of thing. And threw the circular saw away. It was still going, and I basically could have died. It cut through a bunch of important things, but the main thing was blood loss. And I thought, I kept feeling my pulse and doing the clinical thing. And after about 5 minutes, I realised I wasn't going to bleed enough to go into shock and die. So it was a serious injury though, and it was serious not just because it might have killed me, but because of the agony I experienced. And I've talked about it elsewhere. There's a link in the description about the details about that incident and what I learnt about pain and suffering, and then afterwards. It was a real saga for me. And of course, like a lot of suffering, in retrospect, I learned a lot and I'm grateful for it. But it was a serious... My favourite books. I always have trouble thinking of these, but I've loved the Ken Follett series, History of England, ancient history, medieval history, and modern history, if you like, and written really well. Very similar to James Michener, where he has details of the history, and he researches all that, but he has very interesting characters that he puts into these stories to make it live. Some of Tim Winton, all of Tim Winton's books I've loved, such as Cloud Street and Dirt Music. I love reading his books. I love books where the words are like music and it just flows. When I read on holidays, at least, I read a lot of page turners like spy novels and that sort of thing, crime. Just as a page turner, but to get me out of work mode. But people like Tim Winton, and also Marcus Zusak, The Book Thief book, and Margaret Atwood, for example, The Blind Assassin. They write words beautifully. They string them together beautifully. Shantaram, that's another book I just thought of that I loved, mostly because I had lived in that sort of part of India. Travelled and knew, I could just almost smell the smells of the place when I read that book, Shantaram. Another Australian book that I've loved is a book called The Secret River by Kate Grenville, and other books by her. But honestly, I don't read much non-fiction. I don't read much fiction or non-fiction at all during the year. It's just when I'm on holidays I go to town, and I've probably read on this particular holiday about a dozen books. What are my 5 favourite movies? Well, when I was young, my favourite movie probably, I saw it 3 times, was The Sound of Music. A lot of people love that story when I was just like 12 years or 13 years of age. I love High Noon, that's probably my favourite Western. And I loved Bridge on the River Kwai. Bridge on the River Kwai, that was another great story that I loved. In later life, movies that I've loved, I loved Gandhi, again because it's around India and I could just smell the smells and hear the noises of the bazaar sitting in the cinema. A Japanese movie called Melody in Grey. I love Titanic, not just for the effects, but thought it was a brilliant movie. The Godfather series, I loved all of them. Forrest Gump, Shawshank Redemption, Casablanca. I think they're on everybody's list, and I love them. too. I do like movies, and there's probably lots more I could name, but they're the ones I'll name as an adult that I've loved. 5 things that everyone should experience. Well, it's kind of hard to say should, because you either do or don't get a chance, but I guess from my perspective, I think winning a special sporting event as a team is such a joy, much better than as an individual. And even individual sports, like the Olympics, they function as a team. Everyone sort of wins when somebody wins. And it could be as a spectator, but it could be as a coach, could be as a support person, or it could be as a participant. But winning a sporting event as a team is definitely a high moment, and everyone should experience it, not just because of the joy of the memory, but the learning of teamwork. Something else that everyone should, I think, experience is receiving hugs from children. It's just, when my children have hugged me, or my grandchildren, it's just like the best time. I remember coming home from work. I used to walk home from work, and the 3 kids when they were little were like 7, 4 and 1 or 2 or something, and they were playing on the front lawn, and they saw me walking, and they all ran down to say hello. And my oldest son Simon, I was hugging him there, and then Scott there, and then little Amy came toddling along in her nappy or a diaper, and she kind of took off, but she took off too soon to come up. She would have crashed into the path. So I reached out and grabbed her, and I stood there with 3 kids all hugging me at the same time. And I thought, in life, it probably doesn't get any better than this. And then there was another time more recently when my little Mimi, my next door neighbour granddaughter, she was up early and she was out the front, and I was up early we live next door, and I was having coffee, and she saw me and she toddled down the path, opened the gate, walked around, came up, and then jumped up on my lap and snuggled into me, and I gave her a hug. It doesn't have to be your own kids. It can be your grandkids or whatever, but receiving hugs from children is a great affirmation. It's great for them, of course, but I don't know, I just feel like it's a great experience. A third thing that I think, this is a bit more, not controversial, but personal, but deep spiritual moments are something that it's great if you can experience them. For me, as a Christian, they are a particular, I guess, type of spiritual moment. But other people have deep spiritual moments. I guess what I'm thinking of is that without them, life can be maybe missing something. And how that plays out in people's lives varies, but to have deep spiritual moments and to seek spirituality, I think, is something everyone should have in life. The 4th thing I would name of the 5 is the love of a partner. Jackie and I have been together now for 48 years since our first date, and we do love each other, and it is like every marriage, it's got its speed bumps and rocks and all that sort of stuff, but to have the love of a partner and to know that love is there is a great thing to experience. Now, not everyone has a partner, but certainly the love of some significant other is a great thing in life. And again, best considered, I think, if you don't have that, and there are a lot of lonely people in life. A significant other, it might be a really close friend or mentor or somebody, but to know that there's someone out there who loves you, who'll be there for you, is a wonderful thing. Another thing, I don't know if this is a should, it's just quite personal, but desert sunsets are special. And we've had plenty of those, desert or rural sunsets, because the sunsets for us in Western Australia, the sunsets over the ocean, which has its own majesty. And when we go on our camping trips, every night is spectacular, red, orange. But in Perth, we get a lot of those red sunsets as well. And it may not be a sunset, it may be something else. I guess if you lived up in the north of Scandinavia, it might be the Northern Lights. I don't know, but it's just something about it. And one that just springs to mind is We were camping in the desert with my brother and some other people, and we pulled up near some rocks called Katajuta, the Olgas, Katajuta. And we found a campsite, which my brother knew about already, he'd been there before, and he said, I'll get the fire going, you guys just walk down there and you'll find a sloping bit of rock and you'll be able to watch the sunset on Katajuta. So we were just yakking and we all sort of sat down, and as the sun set, the rock went from its normal red colour to a purple colour, and it was actually quite mystical. It was stunning, and we found that none of us talked. We just sat there watching in awe. We imagined the First Nations people as they came down from up north and saw this for the first time, and we're guessing that every time they saw it, it would have warmed their hearts. Something in nature, like a desert sunset or the sunset on a rock, or I don't know, there's something everyone should experience. What does it do? I don't know, it's just a sense of awe and wonder, I think. Anything that creates a sense of awe and wonder, I think, is a thing that everyone should experience in life. I mean, I do, looking up at the stars, for example, thinking about the universe, always have from when I was a kid. For everyone, this is different, but for me, I feel like experiencing something like that is what everyone should be able to do. Let me add one other thing that everyone should experience. Actually, this was my wife's suggestion. It's great if you can find your gift and use that gift. And it might be, you might be a singer, which I am not, absolutely not one of my gifts. It might be, I don't know, it can be simple. Lots of service type gifts of being kind to people, helping street kids. I don't know, all sorts of gifts. People have different gifts. But once you find that gift and use it, you get a great joy from it. And again, best thought about in the opposite. If you never find your gift and you keep doing things that aren't your gift, it's not quite as fulfilling. One secret that nobody else knows. Well, obviously, if I had one, I wouldn't say it anyway. I don't really have any particular secrets. But I do have, obviously, a lot based on my profession as a doctor. Confidentiality is a standard part of medicine, and I've heard all sorts of things from patients that I can't pass on, and I won't even give an example of the sorts of things. But patients know, and they need to know, that it's rock solid confidential. As when I talk to friends, when they say this is confidential, it's no problem for me to keep it confidential. I hold a lot of confidential information in here, and I'm never really tempted to gossip about them. And I do hear people sometimes talking about something, but I know the fact. I don't jump in. Even if people ask me, I say, oh no, I'm not at liberty to talk about that. I'm not at liberty to talk about anything I know about that. Some people feel like they've got a sense of power if they have secrets. This is the driving force behind gossip. I don't feel that. Confidentiality, I guess it's been indoctrinated into me from when I was a medical student, that confidentiality is a key factor of being a doctor. And so it's kind of second nature to us. What's my legacy? How would I like to be remembered? Somebody asked me this a few years ago, and it was like a blinding flash. I don't actually care to be remembered. I'm not doing anything to be remembered. This doesn't worry me. I mean, many times we've discovered something and someone else discovers it 10 years later and publishes it, and people say, why don't you get upset about it? I say, well, why? Everyone's trying to help discover things that help people. I don't need to be remembered for the original discovery. Why? Why do I feel that way? I guess because I am aware that no one's going to really remember you anyway. And people who do things to be remembered, well, you're going to be in the grave anyway, so what's the point? I think of Mozart. I died at the age of 32 or something. He's in some unmarked grave in Vienna. His music is loved by so many people, including me, but he doesn't know about it. What's the point of his being remembered? So I don't really think about it. Being in a world of life and death, I don't really think about it. But if I was pushed, how would you like to be remembered? I think it wouldn't be for any discovery or anything in particular, but as having lived a life of integrity. Sometimes people accuse you of lacking integrity, and partly that's to get under your skin if they're annoyed with you, but I have always, I think, been a person of integrity, deep integrity, including integrity of thought. that I've been a man who's lived in grace, that I've respected people, even if I don't get respect back again. That's grace. And I hope people feel kindness and compassion from me. They say, oh yes, Bruce was kind and cared about me. And that especially applies to my kids, my role as a dad and grandfather, but also as a husband. I mean, hey, I'm so imperfect that I wouldn't even want to take time to bore you with that, and I'm sure anyone could list a bunch of my imperfections, but I hope that I'm remembered as someone who sought to be a person of integrity, grace, and compassion. Near-death experiences. Well, most people haven't had too many of these or any, but I seem to have had a lot, and I should be grateful. So I've been asked to describe some of them, so here's the first one. Not in chronological order, but just off the top of my head. I had 3 motorbike accidents in Papua New Guinea. I bought a motorbike, cheap motorbike, because that was the only way to get around, really. And had some other near misses, but one in particular, I was pretty sure this was it. I was riding along a gravel, winding mountain road up in Papua New Guinea, and I'd been doing it for 6 hours or something, and had dust in my eyes, and I missed a corner, and I went over a cliff. It wasn't a sheer cliff, it was probably 80 degrees or 70 degrees, I don't know what it was, but it went down, and I could see, as I went over, I could see the tops of trees, so I knew it was a long way down. So I thought, well, this is it. This is it. This is how I'm going to end my life. I was 24 years of age. And as I went over, I looked at that slope, and I thought, if I kept some speed up, I could go down that slope, because I'd seen it in the movies. And I stayed on the motorbike, and I got to the bottom, and there were trees, and so I obviously had some speed up then, so I dodged between the trees and went about, 30, 40 metres before I stopped. And I thought, wow, I'm alive. I'm alive, and haven't hit any tree, and I'm still sitting on the motorbike. So I turned the motorbike around, I looked, and of course there's this huge slope back up to the road. And I'm in the middle of nowhere on my way up to Mount Hagen, in the middle of nowhere by myself. So I thought, no, I'm stuck, because I can't get up that slope. And I thought, what about if I went back with my motorbike, picked a nice run, got up some speed, where there was a gap between the trees, and then tried to go up the hill at speed. I might be able to get there, but it's a disaster. Of course, if you don't get there, it's a disaster, because you fall off, and if you're not careful, the motorbike will fall with you, and down you go, and you get crunched again. So I got up fastest I could on the earth, and up I went, zzz, and as I got near the top, I was still going, and I thought, I'm going to make it. And when I got to the lip of the cliff, the motorbike went into the air and then clunked down onto the ground, and I was still on the bike. So I put my left foot on the road, and I thought, this is amazing. This is like the movies. And the thing I remember is, apart from the fact that I was still alive, was that there were some Papua New Guineans running down the hill. There was about 8 or 10 of them who had been walking and seen me go over the cliff, and they were running down the hill to look at the mess. Looking along this fellow man, you got plenty bloody stuff. Anyway, when I jumped up and landed on the road, I looked up, and they all kind of stopped and and were shocked. Etched in my memory forever. I've had some more near-death experiences, which, I've been asked to talk about them. Another one was on Mount Kilimanjaro in early 1993, and me and my friend Mark were climbing, and we were at about 17,500 feet or so, maybe a bit more. We left at midnight, and a blizzard had hit, but we kept going up. That's a whole other story. People were coming down, but we decided we'd keep going up for various reasons. But here's the thing. We didn't have crampons or ice axes or anything. It was just like snow everywhere and blizzard, and we didn't expect this, and we didn't prepare for it. And to get up, it's like 45 degrees, so you had to kick your boots into the snow and get a foothold, and then then another one, and then another one. And then I kicked my boot into a foothold, and the foothold gave way. So I started to slide down the mountain. So I rolled over onto my back and I contemplated that I would hit Kibo Hut, which is down at about 15,000 feet, a bit over, at terminal velocity. That's what I was thinking. And I calculated this, and I saw a rock, and I sort of aimed to slide into the rock. And I slid into the rock, and I bent my knees up to cushion the blow. Anyway, and so I slid into the rock, bent my knees up, and stopped. And I thought, wow, I could have died. And the funny thing is, Mark and I talked about this afterwards because he had a similar kind of scary incident later on, about 20 minutes later. He said, but I thought, I was pretty cool, calm and collected. I'm used to doing that in medicine. People's heart stops in front of you. He said I had a look of terror on my face. That was the reality. I'm glad he told me that, actually. But anyway, that was a near-death experience. The third one occurred when I was about 16 years old. Me and some mates decided to go surfing at Scarborough Beach. Not a good beach for surfing. I mean, we weren't good surfers anyway. We just had some boards and stuff. And it was a shocking day, and the big sea breeze was in. It was overcast, and the waves were churning, but we had to go anyway. Anyway, they went up to get a Coca-Cola at the shops, and I said, I'll just give it a few more goes and then I'll join you. Well, stupidly, I pushed the board in. The board then was carried by the waves in and stopped on the beach. Stupid thing to do because you can break the fin. That's not the point. Then I tried to just body surf in, but the problem is, and I was used to body surfing, that the waves were big enough, huge actually, and they were coming fast, and I thought I'd be in straight into the beach. But there was a massive undertow, and as I tried to go into the beach, the undertow was pulling me back, so I was stuck. And every time I got stuck, I had to look around for the big waves, and I had to take a breath and duck under them. Otherwise, I'd have been mincemeat. So I kept taking a breath and ducking under, but every time I ducked under, I'd get carried further out, and so I tried to body surf in again. And by now, especially paddling the surfboard, I was completely exhausted. And then the disaster happened. I ducked under a wave, but as I came up, there was another massive wave immediately behind it, and I had to duck under it, but I had no time to catch my breath. I went, and I got belted, and I was tumbling like I was in a washing machine. And I was under the water and tumbling, and I didn't know which way was up. And I thought, well, this is it. Everyone at school's going to read in the paper tomorrow that Bruce Robinson drowned they were terrible conditions. We should never have done it. And I was tumbling. I had no idea where the surface was. But finally, what happened? I broke the surface. I remember I broke the surface, and took that beautiful, blissful breath of air. And I noticed something a bit weird. I looked, waiting for the wave to belt me, but I noticed that the waves were all to my right, breaking over there. What had happened was I tumbled, and the undertow had carried me out behind the waves, behind the break. So I floated around on my back for a while. My mates still hadn't, I think I waved, but there were no surf lifesavers and my mates weren't there, so that was a waste of time. Waved for help. But I remembered something, and I give my sister Sandy credit for this. She was always very chatty at the meal table, and she talked about her surf lifesaving course where they said whenever you get into an undertow, people drown because they try to swim against it. But it's always a certain width, and if you just swim sideways, you can then come ashore where the undertow doesn't exist. So I did that, and I went north. I still remember this. I went north until I could feel no undertow, and the waves were not as tippy too at that point. And then I caught a wave in without the undertow. I was able to body surf into the beach, and I remember collapsing face down on the beach, utterly exhausted and realising I'd nearly died. And I sort of crawled up a bit further away from the waves into the sand, and I just lay there exhausted. My mates came with their Coca-Colas. Where you been? It's kind of hard to explain to them that I'd nearly died. That's number 3. Another near-death experience was actually windsurfing. And with windsurfing, you can get into a lot of trouble, but when you're experienced, you can get out of trouble. And one of the things that can happen is you get caught and you get catapulted. You got the sail, holding the sail in your hand. If you just get the wrong angle, whatever, you get catapulted. And this happened to me. But sadly, A, I wasn't experienced enough, and B, I had an old windsurfing board. Anyway, I got turned around, and the harness line wrapped itself around the hook, and I couldn't. Normally, you just release it and get out, but it was wrapped around. So I was tied under the sail. I was stuck under the sail. The sail was filling up with water, and I couldn't get out from under it. But then, again, minor miracle, the water was just deep enough, and I was just tall enough that my feet touched the sand, and I had about, if I was 6 inches shorter, I would have died. But I was able to push my head up through the sail, push my head up under the sail, and create an air pocket. And then I got some breath, and then was able to untangle the harness line, which was just a rope harness line, honestly, early days of windsurfing. And now I know, of course, that you don't use a rope harness line, and if you get catapulted, or first of all, that can't happen nowadays because you have a different sort of harness line. And secondly, if you get caught under the sail, you don't try to guess where to swim out. You grab the boom and feed it in front of you, so you end up at the end of the boom. But if that water had been deeper, or I hadn't been so tall, good night. I also had a circular saw injury, which I've described elsewhere, which could have killed me. What about driving a car? Yeah, I fell asleep once driving home in the small hours of the day, but fortunately it was on a road near our house which had no cars coming the other way, and I crossed the road. I was heading towards the railway line and just woke up. I guess the car was rumbling on the dirt, and I straightened up. Once driving from Galway to Dublin, I was trying to pass a truck in a hire car. In those days there were no motorways. This is 1976. And I looked ahead and there was no cars coming. So I pulled out and I started to pass the truck. But ahead of me there had been a dip in the road and a car was in that dip. There was no sign saying don't pass, or maybe there was. I couldn't tell in the rain. And I'm now next to the truck and there's a car coming straight at me in the rain. So I hit the brakes and the car does one of these fishtails, because I'm a wet road, I'm hitting the brakes. And unbelievably, the car then fishtailed and just fell in behind the truck. I took my foot off the brake and the car started to move forward, and I thought, this is amazing. I look like I know how to drive, but this was just a fluke. Anyway, I've had I don't know, I'm lucky to be alive, obviously, but what impact did near-death experiences have on me? Probably not a lot. When I was young, I'd think, what's the chances? Aren't I lucky? I think the Kilimanjaro experience was a bit irresponsible, probably. I don't know. It didn't seem like it when we went to go up, and then it's just a hike, really. It's pretty demanding. It goes up 19,000 feet or whatever. We didn't expect it to be a problem. And then when the blizzard hit and the snow got deep, it seemed easier to keep going up than to go down, because it's easier to slip when you go down, when you think about it. If you had banana skins on a flight of stairs, would you think it's safer to sort of crawl up or to walk down where you can slip at any time? I don't know, I guess near-death experiences haven't impacted me as deeply as you might imagine, but I certainly, first of all, I do have an attitude of gratitude in life, probably largely independent of those things, but also a sense of purpose. What am I made for? Where can I make a difference, which I talk about elsewhere. But anyway, in answer to the question, near-death experiences, I've had plenty.